This is a Hot Pie Media original.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to host Zach Resnick today, who is joining us here in Austin and relocated here not a long time ago from New York. So it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So Zach is the founder of Unbounded Capital, which invests in scalable blockchains and the companies that use that technologies. So many of you might not even know what blockchain is exactly, and the underlying technology, and neither do I. So that's why I invited Zach to tell us more about blockchain. What is it exactly?
So a blockchain is a type of public database. Many people listening have probably heard the term a distributed ledger. So really any type of way that we store data, there's private ways and there's public ways, and this is a way of storing and interacting with data in a public way. And what makes some blockchains unique, kind of chiefly starting with Bitcoin, is that it allows us to trust these databases to a greater degree than I would argue we should trust other types of databases, whether they're private databases or they're databases maintained by institutions. Most databases that we historically have trusted secure information on are not foolproof. And Bitcoin, kind of the most popular blockchain, had a large innovation in terms of making it what I would argue today is the most secure database in the world.
Okay, we like security. So some would say that the premise of blockchain is to democratize finance and to eliminate the middleman. What do you think of that?
I think that's largely the consensus view within the crypto and blockchain space today, but that's not kind of how I think about the value of blockchain. I think the core value from blockchain comes from being able to have truth and have information that you can trust with effectively 100% confidence. And upon that, there's lots of things that can be built and ways the world will change as a result. So I think, democratizing finance, the way that most people mean that, I think that's a lot more possible with blockchain, but I wouldn't say that's the only goal. I think what a blockchain can really do, especially at scale, is make processing transactions, processing data, interacting with data more efficient. And I think that will have lots of effects on our entire global economy and the way we just interact as humans around the world. As the internet has affected, say, our entire economy, but it's also really meaningfully changed the way that we live as humans. And I think that blockchain will continue to do that, especially a blockchain that kind of has the ability to scale and be used by lots of people in a cheap and fast way.
Is blockchain like the new internet?
I wouldn't say it's the new internet, but I think it's a helpful analogy in terms of what is another transformational technology that kind of changed a lot of things and created incredible amounts of enterprise value. So I think blockchain is like the internet in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and you invest in BSV, which you will tell us more about. And also, why do you think it is undervalued, as you say, and how is Unbounded Capital, your firm, uniquely positioned to capitalize on its mispricing and volatility?
So Bitcoin SV is the original vision and version of Bitcoin. It's today the fastest and cheapest blockchain in the world. You can send money on it instantly for about 1/100th of a penny. And we think that both the speed as well as the cost will continue coming down as more people use this blockchain and as the blockchain scales. So a big reason this asset is undervalued is because there's a big controversy around who created Bitcoin. Someone who has claimed to create Bitcoin is largely looked at the community as someone who didn't create Bitcoin and kind of a fraudster and a scammer. And because this person is really passionate about Bitcoin scaling or the Bitcoin SV implementation of Bitcoin, then a lot of people in the crypto world kind of say, oh, this person's a bad person. Therefore, the entire technology and the entire entrepreneurial community that's building on this version of Bitcoin, I don't even want to look at. Mm-hmm. And I personally was guilty of that as well, even while running a fund and having a fiduciary obligation to do my diligence. Like the vast majority of people in the crypto world today, I let myself kind of get a bit emotional and tribal and not do my proper due diligence as an investor. into this technology due to a lot of the negative, press and things that people were saying about this guy named Craig Wright. And then once I kind of got beyond that and found myself lucky enough to attend the Bitcoin SV meetup in San Francisco and meeting a ton of really smart entrepreneurs and developers, me and my partners were like, okay, we might be missing something here. And we realized we were. And then our fund, narrowed our focus to where we are today, which is just investing in scalable blockchains. And from our perspective, Bitcoin SV is the only serious blockchain about scale. And I think there's a lot of empirical facts to back that up. I think a lot of people listening to this might know about the popular version of Bitcoin that trades as BTC today. That version of Bitcoin can process about 5 to 7 transactions per second. Ethereum can do maybe double, triple that. Visa can do 24,000 transactions per second. Bitcoin SV can do 70,000 transactions per second. And we think in 5 to 7 years, it will probably do tens of millions of transactions per second, and really just transform the way that we do finance and have settlement layers for our global financial system in the world.
So that actually leads me to the next question, because all this processing means mining. And is Bitcoin environmentally friendly?
So it's a bit of a confusing question for a lot of people, because when most people think of Bitcoin, they don't think of kind of the technology and the network, and maybe aren't aware of the fact that there's a few different major implementations. They just think about the popular version of Bitcoin, which is this speculative asset that is incredibly expensive and environmentally costly. Bitcoin is the least or the second least, depending on the day. Usually Ethereum is the worst on this, but least efficient kind of database in the world. And this inefficiency means that it costs an incredible amount of power to process a single transaction. But in Bitcoin's original design and in the form of BSV today, there isn't a limit on how much data or how many transactions you can put in each 10-minute block. So on a blockchain, it's this chain of different blocks. And within the popular version of Bitcoin, they've limited that to about 3,500 simple transactions or 1 megabyte of data, where with Bitcoin SV, there isn't that limit on scale. So we've seen 2 gigabyte blocks, and I think we're going to see, hundreds of gigabyte blocks soon, and then petabyte blocks. And that means that it's about the same amount of power to process a block, whether there's 2 gigabytes of data or 1 megabyte of data. So if you're able to put more data in that, then your transactions are much, much cheaper and more effective. So those cost savings go downstream into saving money on power and saving power usage, which makes this kind of crazy phenomenon happening today, where the popular version of Bitcoin that most people are familiar with is, kind of an environmental catastrophe, where the Bitcoin SV version of Bitcoin perhaps might be one of the most eco-friendly technologies ever created. And we're confident at Unbounded that it will meaningfully drive down both energy, fossil fuel and energy usage broadly, as well as more quickly incentivize the development of green energy.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's really great to hear that you focus on BSV, which is much more environmentally friendly.
And we just wrote a book on this actually called, Green Bitcoin. And we also have kind of a shorter article that summarizes a lot of this research as well, that maybe you could link in the show notes. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Green Bitcoin. I love the name of the book. Yeah, definitely check it out, guys. We'll share with you the link. Thank you for sharing. Your core investment thesis relies on data, payments, and connectivity. How do you select which companies to invest in? And what, in your opinion, makes your top performing portfolio companies stand out so much? What is their secret sauce?
So we're a thesis-driven investment firm. So we have a very strong point of view on kind of where the world is going. And then we pick companies within that. That means that we have to say no to a ton of companies all the time. I'm someone that hangs out with a lot of entrepreneurs all the time. I'm an entrepreneur myself. And even though I know of a lot of people building really great businesses outside of blockchain, within blockchain, if they're not kind of building on what we see as, a scalable blockchain, we're not going to invest there, because our thesis is, very high conviction, and that a scalable blockchain will really transform a lot of different industries, perhaps all over kind of a 10 or 20 year time horizon. So we think that by not focusing on that, we'd be missing out on really kind of the best longer term returns. And that by focusing in on this ecosystem, we're also able to develop the right relationships with the entrepreneurs that are really pushing this change, and that will give us access to better deal flow in the future. So in terms of how we decide within that little slice of our thesis what to invest in, luckily, because we're focused on what today is, I'd say, a relatively small, part of the blockchain and crypto ecosystem, but we think is going to continue growing quickly, we're not inundated with, dozens of different deals and FOMO and party rounds and all of these different things. So we get the chance to really do our diligence on, I'd say, a single digit number of deals every week, get to really chat with different entrepreneurs, get to really support them. And I think what we look for are entrepreneurs really ambitious, and do they really understand kind of where Bitcoin and blockchain is going? And if they do, that kind of allows us to then really dive into the business. So I think what we have is a really kind of narrow funnel at the beginning based on our thesis. And then if they get past that, it's actually fairly broad. So, connectivity, data, payments, like this encompasses a lot of different companies. Mm-hmm. So we try not to limit ourselves, more than the very limiting thesis that we already do, because that's what we have really high conviction in. And, we have a portfolio that has a number of different companies, 2 tokenization companies, a company that's doing smart objects and NFTs on the BSV blockchain, one of the fastest growing derivatives exchanges in the world. And what all these founders have in common is that they really understand Bitcoin and blockchain, and they're leveraging it in ways that allows them to do things that no other technology, blockchain or otherwise, could allow them to do.
Wow. I want to invest in your fund. You got me. You convinced me. So tell us more about some of these biggest winners in your portfolio companies, which made your fund's performance net of fees to be almost 700%. It's phenomenal.
So just, my lawyer would be mad if I don't say this. Please look at our website or listen to the initial introduction for the disclosures around that statement. But yeah, in terms of some of our portfolio companies, there's a company called Run on Bitcoin, which is like a tokenization, smart object, smart contracting platform. So what most people don't know is that Bitcoin actually originally had Turing complete smart contracts, but then the kind of popular version of Bitcoin, they took that away in 2015, but it exists on BSV today. So all the cool things that you can do on, say, like Ethereum, you can do in kind of a better, faster, and cheaper way on Bitcoin SV. So what this company does is allows you to write smart contracts, create smart objects easily without having to learn kind of the really complicated Bitcoin scripting language, and just code in JavaScript, which is the most popular developer language in the world. And today, this company is putting over all of the transactions that the Ethereum network does daily. So Ethereum does 1.2 to 1.4 million transactions every day on the blockchain. Run is facilitating somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million transactions per day now onto the BSV blockchain. Yeah.
Wow. Congrats to you.
Thanks.
How did you meet the founder?
How do we meet Brenton? It's a good question. I think my partners first met him in person in London, but so we've invested globally. Most of our investments are outside the United States. Oh. And like kind of a lot of the crypto and blockchain world, and kind of just broadly the startup community now, it's getting more globalized, it's getting more distributed, more decentralized. So a lot of our interactions are kind of online on Twitter. There's kind of like a BSV ecosystem private Slack group. Oh. But yeah, I'm actually not remembering exactly when I personally first met him, but I've known him for a while. We chatted a lot yesterday.
I once heard there is this private Slack group or something of like Bitcoin crypto investors that to get in you need to pay $10,000 or something like that. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that exact one, but I'm sure there's multiple ones with price points like this. Definitely some Slack and chat groups in 2016, 2017, as I was starting out, I found was, even if they were a little annoying and they were a little intense, they were definitely helpful.
Yeah, okay. Because these private clubs where all the deals are getting done at, definitely curious to see how more people outside of these circles can learn about these opportunities.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of strong opinions. I think a lot of people that are listening to this that might be, very experienced crypto people, they think of themselves as a crypto blockchain investor. they probably will disagree with what a lot I've said so far in the interview. And I,
a lot of controversy.
Yeah, both controversy as well as just different approaches, different values. Most of the crypto and blockchain world, as you put it, is trying to, democratize decentralized finance. And that's kind of their focus, which is this value of decentralization or trustlessness, and trying to create a world of which we don't actually need to have institutions. We don't need to have law and accountability. We could have all of this governance and law on the blockchain. And I, am sympathetic to that idea and think that there's some that makes me feel good that people are trying to do that. But I'm also an investor that has a fiduciary obligation, and I, want to make money for my investors. And I think that kind of going to war and being so antagonistic to governments and regulators isn't really a winning strategy. And that's the strategy that the vast majority of crypto networks, crypto assets, crypto companies are taking. I don't think it's going to end particularly well.
Wow.
But most people think it will end well, so we'll see what happens.
We will see what happens. Oh my God. Can't wait to have you back in a year from now and see what's being new in the space. So you mentioned that several blockchain infrastructure companies will emerge that will be bigger than Amazon, Google, and Netflix. Could you please elaborate on this?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think, different tokenization smart object companies like Run could potentially be bigger than these different companies because, today our internet uses lots of different databases to access different websites. So if you're going to Amazon.com, you're probably pinging hundreds, thousands of different databases to load all that information. And that's not necessarily the most efficient way of restructuring structuring our internet. And what we think is that the internet will kind of be restructured where the vast majority of the important and secure data in the world, or hashes of that data, will be on kind of the BSV, Bitcoin blockchain, or another scalable blockchain if something emerges in the future. And then instead of having to ping lots of different databases, you just ping one. And that sounds like maybe a small innovation, but making the internet much more efficient, making processing all financial transactions a lot more efficient, I think will go a really long way. And that being able to process those transactions effectively will be a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And I think there's likely to be, one or two or some different big players in there. And depending on how things go, if this type of blockchain architecture starts to replace traditional cloud architecture, and Amazon and Microsoft and the incumbents don't really see that and can't keep up, I think they could both lose market share for some of their existing businesses and then not get a lot of kind of this new business of transaction processing and interacting with data. So we'll see how it plays out, but that's kind of, I'd say, the most likely type of company to kind of succeed. There's also, I think, more specifically tokenization companies, where right now the getting liquidity for different assets that aren't, public US equities is a nightmare. It's expensive. There's lawyers. We have fragmented liquidity all around the world. And I think, assets, fundamentally want to be liquid, and same way information wants to be free. So now we have technology that makes it easier for that to be done. And I think companies that play a core role in kind of bringing our traditional financial system from an account-based model to kind of a cash system blockchain model, I think will be able to make very significant revenues, potentially greater than those companies that you've listed there.
Definitely. I think all of our listeners really like these concepts, and that sounds like the future. So this is really exciting for you to be in the midst of all this innovation. So I'm going to conclude our really fascinating interview with my final question, which is also a bit personal. You're actually a former professional poker player, and you've played over 10,000 hours of poker in your lifetime. Amazing game. Tell us how this past experience and skill sets help you to become a successful investor.
I think poker is a really wonderful game for getting to know yourself, understanding risk, and just being really comfortable with the ways that your emotions can affect your decision making. So with poker, there's a really tight feedback loop relative to, say, investing, in terms of, are you making quality decisions? What is your process for making decisions? And it's a lot easier to analyze because you don't have kind of inputs or things that are potentially very subjective. There's only 52 cards. You kind of know a lot of the probabilities with investing. There's so many unknown unknowns, but with poker, there's not really any unknown unknowns, at least from a strategic sense. There's sometimes kind of an emotional or personal sense. But if you take the time, whether you're professional or not, to kind of analyze how you play the game of poker kind of every time after you play, if you think about it deeply while playing, At least for me, that's been incredibly helpful for just honing your decision-making process. And ultimately, I think being a good investor is about, making really great decisions, especially making great decisions under pressure. When you take away kind of the 10 best days for someone's investing career, the returns might go negative after that. Like the money is made in kind of a Pareto distribution, and being able to perform at a high level when you really need to, that's kind of, I think, where you're going to really see the most significant returns if you're managing an actively managed portfolio. So I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to play and study poker for a while. I encourage everyone else to do it, regardless of kind of how serious you get. And, I haven't really studied or played seriously for many years now, but I still enjoy playing poker and host games all the time, and find that if I don't play poker actually regularly, my mind's a little less sharp. Like playing once a week or so is a good balance for me in terms of just using that part of my brain that's really helpful for investing.
Oh, awesome. And great tips. Thank you. Zach Resnick, Unbounded Capital. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Ash.
And see you soon. And thank you all.
Thanks for listening. You can find more episodes and all of our other Hot Pie Media originals baked fresh daily at our home online at hotpiemedia.com, the Hot Pie Media YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts.